Hey everybody, welcome to ARE Live. I'm Mark Tier, the founder of Black Spectacles, and today we're going to be talking with a panel of architects who did not take the traditional path to licensure. During this episode, we're going to talk about why they wish they had gotten licensed sooner, and with the idea being that when we're done with this episode, hopefully you can sort of appreciate their advice, and maybe that'll help motivate you to get the ARE behind you. Our next ARE live broadcast, we're going to share research about some of the most effective ways to learn and retain information so you can prepare your study plan and gain confidence that you need to sort of pass the ARE. There's some really interesting research we've discovered, and so we want to share some parts of it with you guys. Some updates to our products. As you may have heard, Black Spectacles is the first ever NCARB approved test prep provider for all 6 of the ARE 5.0 divisions. And then also, if you're looking for support and structure while studying, you can join one of our group coaching cohorts. Registration for our next cohort begins tomorrow, and that cohort launches in October. And actually, Dawn and Jorge are both participating in that program right now. Also, as I always like to tell people, if you'd like your boss to pay for your Black Spectacles membership, be sure to tell them about our firm licenses. Whether you work for a 10-person or 10,000-person firm, we have a variety of options for firm licenses. So you can visit blackspectacles.com/firms to learn more about that. There's a form. You can fill out that form and get a little bit more information from the guys on our firm team. And then lastly, today we have a special discount on Black Spectacles individual memberships to share, and I'll provide that coupon code at the end of the show, so stay tuned. Our guests today, 2 great guests. My first one is my old friend Jorge Barrero. Jorge and I worked together back in our days at Gensler. Jorge is now a regional design director and vice president with global architecture at HKS, with 20 years of experience in all aspects of architecture, from design, visualization, computation, fabrication, lots of Asians there. And as I mentioned, Jorge is currently part of our ARE group coaching program and is already 4 for 4 on his exams, which is awesome. And our other guest is, Jorge, hello.
Hello.
You can say hello to everybody.
Thanks, Mark.
And then my other guest is Dawn McInnes. Dawn has over 18 years of experience in architectural design. She's worked on a variety of U.S. government classified and unclassified contracts, including the Department of Veteran Affairs projects, as well as residential and commercial facilities. Her work has focused on research, development and design, project management and coordination. And she's also, as I mentioned, currently part of our ARE group coaching program, studying to pass the ARE. So welcome, Dawn.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
Happy to have you. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and jump in here with our first item for discussion. So there's this idea out there that life gets more complicated as time goes on, as you get older, and that perhaps that's a rationale for trying to get licensed sooner rather than later. Jorge, can you talk a little bit about your experience with this idea of life gets more complicated as time goes on?
Of course, happy to. So, yeah, I think, having been working for 20 plus years and having started a family 15 years ago, I always thought the time where my kids were younger was going to be the busiest. And as it turns out, that's not the case. The older the kids get, the busier they get, which means the busier I get. And so as your career advances as well, your responsibilities grow, and the more that you have to do at work. So things get busier, and they hence get more complicated. So finding time to study changes, right? I couldn't just, thinking about taking the ARE, I couldn't just think back to the way I studied for exams back in college, because I didn't have kids or a career. And so I couldn't just revert to that sort of method, and trying to fit in focused time and quiet time and dedicated time. I had to sort of carve it out in smaller chunks throughout the day in order to do that. So things get more complicated, and you have to almost change the way you're used to doing things. And so to that end, it complicates it. So if you are not prepared to do that, it definitely makes it a little harder.
Yeah. Dawn, what's your experience with this topic?
So similar to Jorge, right after graduating from college, a year within that year, I had my son.
Huh.
And I was really gung ho to get into the industry and really do all the good work I was dreaming of doing in school. But as soon as I had my son and I was working, my focus shifted. So it changed from wanting to advance in my career to now focusing on providing for my family. And at that time, I was a single mother, so it was all on my shoulders. So I had to make the decision to focus on making moves in the industry that would help me provide for my son rather than help me get more exposure in different areas in the architecture industry. So there were some projects that I couldn't do because I had a child at home to take care of. And there was some travel I couldn't do because of that same thing. So I waited and I pushed off taking my exams because I really didn't want to miss any of the time with my child. So my entire focus on my career changed um, once that happened. So, and I notice now with the licensing procedures, you can sit for your exam earlier, which I think is a
Mhm.
great thing because things do begin to happen as you start to work and as you start to learn more about life. So the sooner you can get it done, it really makes it easier.
Yeah, I think the other thing, I guess from my seats, um, to add to this is, and maybe get your guys' comments on. I mean, I remember being young in my career, and it felt like there was this mountain of work on my desk as a practicing, young architect. And man, I don't know, like you look forward, 10 years or even 20 years, um, it's not easier. It's not like the work at hand becomes less or easier. I'm curious, Jorge, what you think about that in terms of work, because like right now we're talking about
Hmm.
kids
Yeah, of
and
course.
kids, and so what we're basically saying is, if you have kids, life gets more complicated. But maybe even for those folks who don't have kids or
Hmm.
don't plan to, how does your workload change as time goes on?
Well, certainly the workload gets, I mean, there's a baseline amount of work that we always have at our desk, right?
Yeah.
So I think the complexity of it may change over time, but
Hmm.
the key is always to have just a good support system, right, at work. And by that I mean I'm fortunate enough to work with a team of people, so that we support each other, and other of my team members are also taking the exam, so we basically have each other's back.
Mm.
So if we know somebody's going to be out because they have to study and take tests, you know, it's full on support to say, yeah, go do it.
Hmm.
We'll cover you.
Hmm.
And then everything gets reciprocated. And so I think it's important from a work point of view to obviously meet your responsibilities, right? Because we all have to, and we've all committed to do that. But solicit the support of your firm, which I think most firms actively do. So I don't think that's that hard to do. But it's, mentally and for yourself, really define that time when work ends and your study time begins when you go home. I know I have a hard time separating those things. For me, I always bring home with me the work, maybe not necessarily things that I'm working on, but I am constantly thinking about work 24/7. So I had to make a very conscious effort to mentally have that break in order to be able to turn off work and focus on the exam, knowing that it's going to be a temporary situation, hopefully, right?
Yeah.
And then resume normal activity and think about work nonstop.
Yeah. So would you say, like, as life went on, it's not necessarily that the workload got more complicated? So maybe that's not really an issue here, but instead, just like, regardless of whether it gets more complicated or time consuming or not, the wisdom here is to find a support system within your firm and then be disciplined about sort of structuring your study time.
Yeah, I mean, I think the amount of work probably goes up and down, right? We all have deadlines, and it's, maybe cyclical to a project.
Right.
But I think as an average, everybody, we all work 40 hours a week, maybe up to 60 at certain peaks, etc. We have a certain average. I will say when I was younger and I was not focused on taking the ARE,
Yeah.
I just worked as much as I could because I could.
Yeah.
Not necessarily because I was being asked to do that. So as an average, I think I don't know that I think the work is always there, and you do as much of it as you want to do, really. I had my original boss right out of school, notoriously kicked us out of the office at 5, and I was very fortunate at the time to have that extra time, but I hated it because I was young, I didn't have any kids, and I was not getting paid all that much, so I needed extra money, and I was willing to work as much as possible. And he religiously would take us out of the office at 5, and he said, go have a life. Work is still going to be here tomorrow. Work is always going to be here. So, I think everybody kind of has to look at their own circumstance. But I think there's always a baseline.
Yeah. Don, what are your thoughts about this topic? Have you observed that as your work life, sort of went on, things got more complicated or not so much? And how did you handle that, I suppose?
So similar to Jorge, like the workload didn't actually change. It was just the way I had to harmonize work and family. That changed as the years went on, because there were certain things that my son needed that changed as he grew older, and there were things that I needed that changed as I grew older. In my company, it's a large company, so I did have the support, and the people there, whether they were engineers or architects, they understood the process of licensing and needing time to study. So I had that support there had I needed it. But it was just, for me, mindset wise, I was not in the mindset of getting licensed. I was more in the mindset of just working. And that was the shift that complicated the process for me. I had to make that shift to, remember, you do want to get licensed. You do want to get back on that track, because there will be work there for you. There will be projects to work on. They do need your expertise, but there's this part that you need to accomplish that only you can do, that you need to focus on.
Yeah. Awesome. I'm going to stay with you, Don, for the next one here.
Okay.
So another thing we've heard quite a lot, and really frankly experienced as we've talked to folks who've gone through this process of getting licensed, is that too much professional experience can actually create a problem for you. And Don, I'm kind of curious what you think about this and how you've observed this in your experience.
Yes, especially in the industry that I'm currently working in, there is a certain way that the government does work. And most of the time, it doesn't really connect with real world experiences. So in studying for the exam, I really had to disconnect all of these years of experience to study for this exam. And in the beginning, when I was taking 3.0 and 4.0, it was very challenging for me to pass any of the exams, because I've taken them all, but I didn't begin to pass them until I recognized, Dawn, you have to forget everything you do all day long and just study the material for the exam. And I really feel, as you're mentioning here, if I didn't have those 13, 18 years of experience in a certain topic, it would have been easier for me to make that shift. But when you're day-to-day managing projects a certain way, doing drawings a certain way, putting packages together a certain way, it becomes challenging to just turn that off and just study what's in a book, because it's a disconnect for you. So if I was able to get in on this studying process earlier, I don't believe that would have been so challenging.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Jorge, what are your thoughts here?
I agree. There's, having been working on architecture for 20 years, I've learned a lot, but not all of it is applicable to the exam. So there's definitely an amount of information that is specific to the exam. It's really a baseline, what NCARB is looking for. So you really need to study that material from the eyes of NCARB and what it is that they're asking you, and really just answer that question. Don't answer your opinion of that question. And I think that's where it can trip you up. However, I will say that having taken in some of the exams, there was a couple of, maybe I'll just say, very good educated guesses that probably saved me on a couple occasions of things that I did not anticipate. And having done projects of, let's say historic restoration nature, things of that, that I knew what the answers were on the ARE, and that was, purely based on experience. So I think there's a positive and a negative, but I would err on the side of just focus on what NCARB is looking for, and don't provide your opinion of what you think the answer should be.
Yeah,
and stick to that.
That's interesting, Don. I wonder, maybe even in your coaching group that you're in with Black Spectacles, but also your experience taking the test. I know we've had a number of folks who, for example, they only worked on interior renovations of retail projects for 20 years, and then they step up to take the test, and suddenly, they've never drawn a wall section before, they've never, done a roof detail before, and this test is written from the perspective, as best as I know, from the perspective, or sort of as the core, like a commercial architecture project, sort of a mid-sized office building, in the suburbs or something. Have you observed people having problems in your coaching group as a result of having sort of uneven experience or too much experience, et cetera?
I believe so. Everyone in my coaching group is kind of in the same boat as me. They've been in the industry for like over 15 years, working on their different projects. And then when they have to turn to focus on the study material, it's very different from what they've been doing on a regular basis. So we have people in our group who they do commercial, but it's very different from the commercial that NCARB is focused on these exams. So it is a shift. It's things that they need to study that they've never actually had to work on before. So that becomes a challenge for them to, like I said before, turn off what they've been doing on a regular basis and learn something that appears to be completely new for them, because that was not like the niche that they've been working on all these years. So maybe if we were 2 years in, it wouldn't be that difficult to shift, but 15, 20, 25 years, it becomes a challenge.
Yeah. So, I kind of feel like the message we're trying to send here is, in a way, having some experience. And I think the NCARB, if whoever's listening to this, if you were to go to NCARB and download their, every year they do an annual report called NCARB by the Numbers. And there's a chart that I was just looking at this week. And it shows you the average pass rate based on how much experience you have. And there's a really interesting little like peak, I suppose, and it peaks at, I think, like 2 or 3 years of experience. So it's lower if you have less than that, and it's lower if you have more than that. So like that's kind of like the ideal target zone, which, by the way, that coincides with, remember, 5 years ago, before NCARB made a bunch of changes to when you're eligible and whatever, you had to wait basically 3 years and go through all of your AXP, formerly known as IDP, hours before you could take the test. So I feel like there was probably some logic to that. So I think the takeaway is about having some experience, but maybe as you move along, it can cause problems.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you're able to use your experience to your advantage on the exam, I think that's great, but it's definitely can be a little risky at times if you start to cross over into, well, this is how we've always done it kind of a thing. And that's where you can get into trouble. So I think the one thing that's ingrained in our coaching group, it's always read the question, understand what the question is looking for, and answer that. Don't focus on this is how my firm does it, et cetera, because that's where you get into trouble.
Yeah, NCARB doesn't care what your opinion is.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next one, Jorge. We'll lead with you on this one. So the topic here is about failure, it being sort of inevitable. Everyone who I know who's gone through the process of getting licensed has failed at least one exam, some people multiple exams, some people multiple exams multiple times. I know I failed along my road to get licensed. I guess I'm curious, what is your thoughts about sort of handling it and how, how to handle it as you sort of
Sure.
encounter it.
Well, I mean, I think the key is to understand what failure is, right? Because I think a lot of people, or some people, may interpret failure as not being good. But I think it's important to take a different perspective of it and understand that failure can be a good thing, because we all fail all the time at many things, not just the AREs. And, I did take 4 exams right out of the gate. I passed all 4, and then I took a 5th one and I failed it. And so it's really about going back and just assessing where you went wrong and identifying the weak spots. I think it's, basically what I told anyone else that has failed in our cohort and other people I know. Hey, there's nothing. It's not a judgment. It's not a looking down on anyone if they fail. It's just chin up. It's study and take it again, right? That's all we can do. No different than learning how to ride a bicycle. My daughter fell 10 times before she stayed on. And it's just get back up, get back on it, and do it again. Interesting for me, it was good from a perspective of being a dad of 3 kids, 2, 1 in high school, 1 in middle school, and 1 in grade school. When I gave them the news that I failed, I think they were more sad than I was, because my daughter's, she looked at me, it's like, but Dad, you studied so hard. And I said,
That's
yeah,
so sweet.
and that's okay.
Yeah.
It just means I need to study a little bit harder. But it's not a bad thing, right? I identify the issues, and it's okay. You just move on. So you get up, you dust off, and then you do it again. So it's failure it's inevitable for everyone. So no need to look down on yourself. Just do it again. It's okay.
That's awesome. Like, what a great life lesson to, especially being someone who's a family. What a great life lesson to teach your kids, for them to watch you, try really hard at something and fail.
Yeah.
And what a great lesson that is for them, as they sort of look into the future. Dawn, I'm curious what your thoughts are here, and what your experience has been around sort of, dealing with, getting tripped up on one of the exams.
Yeah. So in the beginning, I did not take failure very well.
Yeah.
I did not. I'll admit that myself right now. Taking the earlier exams when they had the vignette sections, which I'm so excited those are gone.
Yeah,
but
right.
taking that part, it really hit my confidence, because I'm in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, I do this every day. And I know what I'm doing. Why can't I pass these exams? And in the beginning, I took it personally. I'm like, well, maybe I can't do this. Maybe this isn't the field for me. And I went down that path for a few years. I completely stopped everything in the area of architecture. I still went to work, but I had to really pull myself back together and remember why I wanted to get into this industry in the first place, and what this license meant to the good I wanted to do in the world. And I really had to shift my mindset. And watching my son, he's in school, he's in college now for engineering, but he had this mindset, like, I'm going to be an engineer. And he maintained that no matter what happened. And he was so committed to it, no matter, what was going on in his life. He always came back, I want to be an engineer. I want to be an engineer. And he did it. And just watching him maintain his, kind of his internal GPS system of what he wanted to do, it reminded me to get back in there and accomplish the goal I desired to accomplish. And if you fail an exam, get the information that you needed from what happened, take that to help you pass it the next time. And that's the shift that I had to make. I'm like, this is not failing you personally as an individual, as a person who has all this experience. You just failed this test. And I had to disconnect the test failure from me as a person failing. And I think a lot of people in this industry, there is a lot of pressure and there is competition. Sure. And as a female in this industry, there isn't a lot of us a lot of the time at the table. So you put all this pressure on you to compete and to feel relevant in the industry, but you really have to separate yourself from that and recognize you are studying to take an exam. You are not studying to prove that you're worthy. And that was a big thing for me to shift and do. And once I made that shift, I started passing the exam. It started to make sense. It started to click. So all those failures in the beginning, they were kind of necessary for me to get to this point where I shifted and saw, Dawn, this is not about you personally being,
Yeah.
creditable and worthy and good enough. It's just you're passing an exam so you can get to the next level. So
Yeah,
that was a
that's
big
really
shift for me.
really powerful. It's not about your worthiness.
Hmm.
It's not try to disconnect your person and the results. That's
Yeah,
such an awesome thought,
absolutely.
and so cool. Again, like how awesome that as the adult and the parent that we all have something to teach, but also something to learn from our kids.
Absolutely.
Yes.
That's really awesome. Trying to think if there's anything else here. I just know that like so many people, we hear it all the time. Somebody fails a test and they're like, I'm out. I'm not doing this anymore. This is
Yeah.
stupid. Or as you say, they take it personal. It's funny. And we've been doing all this work with NCARB to try to understand all the intricacies of how the test works. And they always remind us, remember, we're not testing for like expert level knowledge. We're just testing for minimum competence, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so to your point, like even that idea suggests that this has nothing to do with like how good of an architect you are. That's something that Mike Newman often talks about, right?
Right.
This
Yeah,
this
he
isn't
does.
about architecture. This isn't about design. Think of this as just a puzzle that you have to basically learn how to solve. It's sort of like this abstract thing that you have to figure out how to tackle or beat, I guess.
Hmm.
All right, so then
Yes.
let's go on to the next one here. And Dawn, I'll start with you. So
Okay.
the rolling clock. I'm still not sure if I know what the heck the rolling clock is. I guess it means you have like 5 years to complete all the
Yes.
exams. And then if you wait too long, then I don't know, they torture you or something. I'm not sure what happens. Dawn,
Kind of feels that way.
can you talk about the rolling clock and what the heck that's all about?
Sure. So the rolling clock, they give you 5 years to pass all your exams. And if
Mhm.
you go over that 5 year mark, any of the exams that you pass, you lose if you didn't pass all of them. So I actually did lose an exam when we switched from the 4.0 to the 5.0. And that was that was another hit to my confidence. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, do I really need to do this? I mean, I couldn't handle this in 5 years. Maybe I shouldn't. So it's all the head game stuff that you're doing. But yeah, I think it is a good way to keep you focused and to keep you on track.
Hmm.
One thing that has really helped me to understand is when you begin the momentum of studying, taking the exam, passing the exam, studying, taking the exam, passing the exam, that momentum keeps you going. It keeps you excited. It keeps you engaged in the process. And this 5 years is this like momentum wheel that they're giving you to make sure you stay in it and stay committed and stay focused. Because if they gave you, I feel personally, if they gave you like this unlimited amount of time to get this done, you wouldn't get it done. You
Yeah.
wouldn't feel like you have a definite end goal and you have to take committed daily steps to get to that end goal if you didn't have that 5 year period that they're putting on you. And I know a lot of people, just the idea of clocks kind of throws them off. I know when I'm taking the exam, I try not to look at the clock counting down because it kind of raises my anxiety. But
Mhm.
in this case, just looking back now, I really do feel like 5 years, you should be able to knock out these now 5 exams. So I,
Yeah.
I think it is a positive thing.
Yeah. Jorge, what are your thoughts on this one?
Sure. I mean, I'm on a 20-year rolling clock myself. So yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think the more years they give you, the more you probably can put it off. So it is nice to have constraints. One of my least favorite words in the English language is deadline, and I'm sure a lot of people can sympathize with that are online. But the deadlines in a way are good because they keep us accountable. So I think this is kind of a 5-year deadline to get it done once you start. So having those limits definitely help you at least start the process of getting some rigidity and commitment to this process. And I think that's, for me, the biggest reason to join the coaching, and what I found most helpful was that accountability. So the more things in place that would hold me accountable to be able to focus on this, get it done, stay the course, I felt like the better I perform, because then it really just, in a way, forces you to do it. And so yeah, I mean, I still have plenty of time on my rolling clock. But yeah, I mean, it's just another thing for, another, I guess, mechanism to stay committed. But more importantly, I think just mentally you have to commit to do it. And just stay the course. Having said that, it is nice to have some time, so you're not feeling like, you have a year or 2 years. So I think 5 years feels about right. Certainly, it's enough time to pass all the exams.
Yeah. And so for those of you who've never heard of the rolling clock, or you're like me and still don't really understand what the heck it means, I believe that either NCARB or the state, your state, but I believe it's NCARB, sort of establishes the rolling clock for you. And so if you don't know where you are on your rolling clock right now, I'd log into NCARB and
there's a big countdown there.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, I know a lot of things have changed.
Yeah.
But so yeah, just make sure you're aware of that so that you know where you stand, because God, that would suck to lose one of your exams. And Dawn, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Jorge, we'll go to our last question here, topic, I suppose. Getting licensed boosts credibility. So this is really a question or a comment getting at, I guess, as you move along in your career, not having your license can be a problem. Can you talk about that?
Sure.
And how it relates to credibility?
Yeah, I mean, I think the licensure is definitely something that's required, right, to be a practicing architect. We all know that. It's definitely, a measure of someone's, as you mentioned before, sort of base knowledge and competency, right? Not that there's people, right? There's several of us that have not gotten completely licensed yet. Doesn't necessarily mean we're not competent, we're not good at what we do, but this is just a measurable way to say, hey, here's the license, we meet the basic requirements, right? And so from a professional point of view, there's a level of comfort, and then there's also a level of accountability that you are committed to the practice, to yourself, to your goals. And some firms, it becomes a requirement as you advance in your career for promotions or different roles or that sort of thing. I mean, some jurisdictions or some projects actually require that the staff is licensed. And we've been on proposals where they require either lead AP, licensure, et cetera, et cetera. So again, it's just a way to have all the boxes checked so that you don't have any sort of hurdles along the way. Not to say that you can't have a successful career without it, but I think it does make the road a little harder. The climb is a little steeper. And so if you can take the time to get it done, it does make it a little bit more of a smoother path along the way.
That makes a lot of sense. Dawn, what has your experience been on this topic around, sort of how you can progress in your firm and otherwise? In fact, you mentioned it early on that it's been a hindrance to you. Can you talk about that?
Yes, absolutely. So in my firm, getting your license will help you get on the path to more management and leadership roles. And if you don't have your license, there's a ceiling that you're going to hit. No matter how many years you have experience, no matter how much they know you're capable of doing this work, it's just that you don't have that credential. And on paper, they need that in order to justify, increasing your pay, giving you more responsibility. So it definitely has limited where I can move in my organization. And in the state of Maryland, they only allow you to use the title architectural intern. No matter how
Yeah.
long you've been out of school, you're still an intern technically. And that didn't sit well with me
Yeah, for
at
sure.
all. So I use the term architectural designer. It feels a little bit better, but still, it's still not what I want, and it's still not what I went to school for, and the goal that I ultimately want to reach. So it's kind of personal and professional for me in terms of credibility, because I know the work I did in school to get to where I am right now. I know the work that I do in my firm and the benefit that I provide to my firm. And I want to be able to have that title attached to it because I know the work I put into it and I know the value that I bring. And since that is the way the industry is set up, it's something that I do want. And I don't want questions as to whether or not I'm capable of doing something just because of a perception. Well, she
Mhm.
doesn't have the RA, so can she really do architecture? You know, because people who don't know, you know, you would question a doctor who does not have an MD. So, you know, they would kind of assume the same thing, at least in the circles that I frequent a lot. So it's very important, especially in government work. As Jorge was talking about, on proposals, they're looking for certain qualifications. And if you don't have it, you can't bid on those projects.
Mhm.
So I want to make myself more credible in the professional environment, and there's also my personal life, just to show
Mhm.
that yeah, you can do this and it's possible for you. So that's why I keep going to gain this licensure so I can have that credibility.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And inspiring. In fact, I have to say, I'm looking at the questions and comments that have come through here. And although you can't hear them, I'm not sure if you can see them, Don, but you getting like
Mhm.
tons of high fives.
Oh,
Angela
thank you.
saying, Don, you're an inspiration for all women who are trying to get their license. Thank you for being here. Nothing happens for a reason.
Awesome.
That's one I gotta, I don't know, just a bunch of support for what you're talking about. So
Awesome.
I'm trying to think if there's any specific questions that might be helpful for everyone. A comment here from Mikhail, who mentioned he's as a 50-year-old with 25 years in the field after degree, would echo what we're talking about and said that um, would add, don't let people in your firms hold you back either. Some firms are actually afraid of the competition. And actually, Jorge, you said
Mm,
most firms support you. Well, we've actually heard of numerous firms who kind of
Yeah.
don't, or who much more focused on just getting the work done and deal with your license on your own and aren't super supportive. And so if you're in one of those firms that, number one, this is one of the best times to be looking for a new job. So, so that's one part. The other thing is, you may have to find the support that we've talked about to sort of overcome any impediments that might actually be in your firm. Let's see here. Some of these questions are really specific. Yeah, I think those are the good ones right away. Yeah, that's a good question, Jennifer. Jennifer asks, have any of you ever been on the verge of losing an exam and kicked it into gear at the last minute and then passed? And if so, what were your strategies? I don't know if either of you or
The answer is yes.
tell me, Jorge.
Absolutely. I can't remember the specific. It was one of the P's. No, sorry, construction. Project management, I believe. It was, and then I got to the last case study, right? So if you know the exam, you have questions at the beginning, 80, 100, etc. And then there's 2 case studies. And then I got to the last case study with 10 minutes left. And I knew it was going to be a crapshoot at that point. Luckily, the last case study that I took, I was able to answer 8 of the 10 questions without looking at the case study itself, which is one of the strategies that we learned and we talk about in our coaching, and I'm sure in other forums. Sometimes those questions you can answer without the actual data on the case studies. So I was just random luck. I think I was lucky that I knew the answers to most of those questions. But literally, I had about 10 seconds left on the exam, and I had no time to go back. And luckily I passed it. But yeah, it definitely came down to the wire. So and I had prepared and everything, but I was not prepared for that, and that was just game time. Kick it into gear and hope for the best.
Yeah, that's awesome. Don, do you have any thoughts on this one?
That actually happened with the last exam that I took, and that was project management as well.
There you go.
I mean, I was getting down to the end. I was going through like the questions that I marked to go back on, and some of them I didn't have the answers to, like off the top of my head, and I just powered through the ones that I knew for sure, and I didn't mentally, I didn't quit. Because sometimes when you get to that point, you're like, you know what, there's no way I'm going to pass this exam. Let me just stop now. I did not allow myself to go down that path. I'm like, this information, you studied, you have this, answer what you can, let the clock roll down, and then you're done, and it's going to be fine. Mm-hmm. And I just had to kind of give myself that little pep talk, like, don't quit before you're done, just because it looks like it's going to be a fail. And it ended up not being a fail. You can see the provisional pass or fail before you leave now. And I saw pass, and I'm like, okay, let's go. But I mentally did not allow myself to go down that path. Well, it looks like you're going to fail, so yeah, you did. Just give up. You really have to take charge of your thoughts with this exam. You can't allow yourself to beat yourself up while you're still in the game. Because it's easy to do that because you're fatigued, you're tired, you've been studying, the exam's long, the facility might not be that comfortable, but you have to kind of pull in that inner strength and tell yourself, you can do this, finish strong, and then we'll see what happens after that. But don't quit while you're in it.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Jennifer mentioned to us, she's the one who asked the question. She says she's taking an exam tomorrow. So she's thankful for your comments. And I will say this, something again that Mike talks often about is sometimes the best way to study for the test is to just take the damn test.
Yep.
And not sweat it so much. And in fact, he said this in dramatic fashion. I'll never forget it, like going 5 years back to when we first did our first actually did a lecture together, or he did a lecture in person at AI Chicago, and he started off by saying, you know what, if you guys were all MBA students and you weren't architects, half of you would just take all the tests without even studying. He's like, because you would just know based on laws of probability, you'd probably pass half of them without even studying. Now, I don't know of anyone who's actually, taken that challenge. Maybe we need to do a promotion like that called the No Study Challenge. But hey, what's the worst that can happen? You fail and you take it again. Certainly, time and money is involved, but sometimes that experience of going through the tests is just as valuable. I have to say, there's so many comments and questions here. I want to thank everybody for their comments. We're trying to answer them as best as we can as we go along here. But what I'll ask you, Jorge, is do you have any additional tips or suggestions if you're someone who is, and I suppose maybe let's think about this in two ways. If you're a young, someone early in your career, and you're thinking about, and it's just, man, you're like, forget it, I got other stuff to deal with. Any additional tips for them? And then if you're further along in your career, and I think someone was just mentioning in here, where are they? 50th birthday coming up in 2020. If you're one of those folks, how to think about this?
Well, I guess from a tips, whether you're young or older, like me, I would say I think the first thing is to get comfortable to taking the exam, period, regardless of the material. I think there's definitely an advantage when you go into the exam knowing what to expect, right? I think it's studying the material and knowing the material is one thing. I can imagine, I'm sure for a fact, I know if I had never taken a practice exam or trying to figure out my strategy ahead of time and just going in based on pure knowledge, I definitely still would have struggled probably a little bit more than if I hadn't, right? So practicing your routine is going to be important, because when you are in the test center and you go in and you sit down and you go through the motions and the screens, it's all automatic. Right now at that point, it becomes, it's like muscle memory. All I'm focused is on the question that's going to be come at me and the knowledge I have to answer it. I don't have to worry about how to navigate the exam, because that in itself can throw people off, because the computers could be a little slow, getting to the tabs might be a little slow, remembering formulas, etc., writing those down ahead of time. So my routine, just for reference, if anybody's interested, basically I took as many practice exams as I could. I took the exams not in quiet places, but in busy places, usually my living room with my kids running around. So it was very distracting. But on the plus side, I knew there's no wrong, because it's a practice exam, right? And it really forced me to focus on the question. So it was almost like a mental exercise to understand what they were asking me while there's all this chaos happening. And so when in the actual exam is nice and quiet, there's no distractions, it became a lot easier for me to focus, because I was trained to focus with chaos around me. So I took as many of those. I would take them with exact collateral that I would have at the exam, with number 2 pencils, with a couple sheets of scratch paper, headphones on, just quiet headphones, just at least to simulate that experience physically, what I was going to wear, how I was going to feel, and then ran through the entire exam. And more often than not, I took them in the evenings, and that was just for me, because if I took them in the mornings, I felt that after taking a practice exam, I was done. I couldn't go back to study anymore. But this way, I would take a study at practice exam at the end of the night, and then I'm fried, I just go to sleep. But then, try to really mimic what that experience is going to be like. Get really used to the calculator, get used to the resources for the actual exam. Every time I went in, start the clock of the actual exam, I would do a brain dump, and I would write down all the things that I did not want to recall. That would fresh in my mind. So I would just write everything down that I thought might be useful. That way, I didn't have to, if the question was thrown at me again, I just focused on the question. I didn't have to try to figure out the question and remember the formula, because the formula was written down, so it was right there. And then also, I would go directly after my brain dump. I would go to the case studies, look at those resources, because a lot of the resources for the case studies are sometimes useful for the exam as reference too. So that was, again, just to understand what is in that exam that can help me in any question, not just the study question. And not just the case study questions. And then, just basically just sort of plow through it. And, the other thing for me, I try to take the day off before the exam to just kind of review. And I know that's not always the case, but, if you can, I would recommend it. And I am not a morning person, so I always try to take my exams in the afternoon. That way, in the morning, it was just sort of, I didn't really study too much in the morning, so I would just kind of review my notes, but, had a good breakfast, make sure I was calm, and give myself plenty of time to be relaxed and go into the exam and give it a good shot. So
awesome. Dawn, do you have any parting words here for folks, additional tips as they consider doing all this?
I do. So there are 3 things that I just kind of took notes on really quickly. And this can go for both people if you're just getting out of school and you're kind of new in the industry, or if you've been in it for a while. Get your license and then focus on the niche or the area you really want to get deep in the industry. Because having all of that extra opinion or or perspective going into studying for the exam can just add extra burden to your process. So focus on just studying to pass this test, and then you can really get into how you want your architecture career to look. I think that's really important for people who are just starting out on this journey. Just get your license, and then you can start crafting your career the way you desire for it to look. And kind of connected to that is familiarize yourself with NCARB's expectations for this exam. I know for me, that was a big shift for me to see what exactly does NCARB want me to know in order to pass this exam. Because again, it's competency. It's not perfection. It's not mind-blowing design. It's competency. Can you check off these boxes? Can you demonstrate that you know these concepts? So familiarize yourself with what NCARB is asking you to display on this exam. Don't overwhelm yourself by trying to just read every book on architecture and lighting design, all this stuff when they're not even asking you for it. So, decrease the overwhelm and just familiarize yourself with what they're actually asking you for. And then finally, and this kind of goes more towards mindset and just personal development. Remember why you want to be an architect in the first place, and really figure out, do I really want to be? Sometimes when we're younger, we're kind of pushed down a path because our family or something we saw in movies, and we're really not connected to it. So that makes it harder for you to actually study and remain committed. So kind of figure out, why am I doing this? Why do I really want to do this? And sit with that. And that fuel will help you study and craft out your schedule to sit down and study and to learn new things and to connect with group, to be a part of group coaching that will give you the accountability to stay on your course. But if you really don't know why you're doing it, it's going to be very hard to remain committed to a study program, to taking these exams and pushing through them. So reconnect with your why that you had when you first started college. And if you never sat down to develop a why, this might be your opportunity to do that, so you can keep the momentum going and really conquer this dream that I know a lot of us on here are ready to achieve.
Well, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for that, Dawn. I think
You're welcome.
totally nailed it. So we'll go ahead and let's go ahead and close on that point right there. A couple things to close out here. So first of all, thank you, Dawn, and thank you, Jorge, for participating and sharing your stories in this. Based on the overwhelming comments and support for everything you guys just said, I can tell that this really resonated with a lot of folks. There was, like I said, there's a lot of comments. A number of them had related to, hey, what's the right schedule to get on to study? What are some good study materials and practice exams and stuff. Obviously, here at Black Spectacles, we have study materials, so we have lectures and practice exams that simulate the NCARB experience in flashcards. And we also have the group coaching program. So, of course, we're biased about what the best materials are, but we have the full suite. There's certainly other resources out there that other folks use in combination with ours. And then, as I mentioned, we also have this group coaching program with which Jorge and Dawn are both in. And what that is basically you get paired up with a recently licensed architect who is your coach, and we actually create a schedule for you to go through. And it's usually a 6 to 7 month schedule where you take all 6 exams in that time period. And so that's a more intensive, you have regular meetings, and then you get access to all of our material. So that's sort of what we do. Of course, AIA chapters often have things, and again, there are other resources that are out there in terms of what the best and ideal order to take the tests in and scheduled for studying. The truth is that there isn't one right answer, and I don't even really think that there's a consensus on what the right thing is, because it's kind of personal. It depends on how much time it takes you to study. It depends on where your experience is and where you think you can gain the momentum that Dawn was talking about. So some folks start with the tests that they think are the most relevant, that they think not the most relevant, but they have the highest probability of passing. Others look at the exam and realize it's sort of laid out like the design process, from conceptual design through schematic and DD and CDs, and then construction administration, and they just sort of take it in that linear fashion. So again, there isn't a really one great answer. One thing we have observed here at Black Spectacles with all the folks that we've worked with to try to get licensed is if you take too long to study, it can kind of be pointless, if that makes any sense. In other words, this idea of momentum, I think, is a real thing. And so we actually used to have a coaching program that was, it gave everyone 2 months to study for every test. And what we found was that you lose your motivation, you lose your intensity, you lose your focus. And so the idea of, I think most people kind of take about a month. Some people can do it a little bit faster. Some people take a little bit longer. But I think as a guideline, that's probably like a reasonable idea. In fact, Jorge and I were talking with Bryn here, who she runs our coaching program for Black Spectacles. And he was suggesting even sometimes you need a break as you go through the whole process. Taking all 6 back to back might be too much. Maybe you need a break. So a couple of comments there just to give some folks some insight. But to bring this to a conclusion for our next ARE Live podcast, and again, if you're not subscribed to our ARE Live, which is our free podcast, it's on iTunes, it's on Android, it's on Stitcher, it's also a YouTube series. So if you're not connected to us in those places, go ahead and do that, and then you can take it with you. I try not to listen to ARE Live in my car, but I can, which is kind of weird. But anyways, you can do that. I know many people listen to it in the car or on their commute or whatever. So at our next ARE Live podcast, we're going to, as I mentioned, we're going to share research about the most effective ways to learn and retain information so you can prepare your study plan and get the ARE past you. We're posting a link to register in the chat box in the GoToWebinar control panel, or you can just go to blackspectacles.com/podcast to sign up right there. It's right on the top of that page. As I mentioned earlier, to learn more about our ARE exam prep curriculum, you can visit our website, blackspectacles.com, where you can try out any of the course videos. And if you are interested in a firm membership and want your boss to pay for your access to Black Spectacles, you could go to the firm page on our website. And again, to learn more about firm licenses for firms of any size. To learn more about the differences between the individual and the firm subscription, you can check out Black Spectacles ARE product demonstration. In this video, our account executives, Ty and AJ, are going to walk you through why a firm subscription is the most efficient and least expensive way to get access to our content. We're dropping a link right now for that demo in the chat box as well. And then lastly, for those of you who are ready to start preparing for the ARE right now, you can use coupon code LIC92419YT to get a 15% discount on your entire duration of your ARE exam prep membership. And then finally, tomorrow we're going to send you an email follow-up about today's live broadcast. So please let us know what you think and share any suggestions you may have. I promise we read every word that you write and use them to tune our next episodes. So thanks for watching.